Go.
Well, good morning, members of the Hornet Nation. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to visit about several important topics. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about the next steps as a part of our return to campus. We'll go through a budget update. And let me let you know now, if you have questions to submit regarding those topics, you can go to emporia.edu/live, and you will see a button that will allow you to submit questions when you enter this event. As we're together this morning, though, it seems important for us to take just a moment to acknowledge the tremendous pain that is occurring in this country right now as we think about individuals like George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and others. And when I sent you the message along with several others last week, I invited each of you to spend some time in self-reflection and also to take opportunities that are made available by the university or other opportunities to learn more about what each one of us can do to stop racism in this country. And so I just wanted to encourage each of you in that effort. We have some wonderful resources here at the university. Dr. Allen had a really terrific event last Friday, and I know that many of you participated in that as well as the march. And so thank you for your efforts. It's so important right now. Well, as we begin to talk about the return to campus, and I don't know about all of you, but I am so ready to be back to what seems like a much more normal kind of work. I wanted to go through just a few things relevant to the return to campus. And let me begin by extending my thanks to all of you for your flexibility and how you have continued to work offline to support our students and one another. And as we move toward a return to campus, there have been many individuals who've been very involved in planning. I want to take just a moment to highlight some of those individuals. There's been a fall planning group of more than 20 from all over campus who've been participating in making those high-level decisions that are important as we prepare for a return to campus. And so my thanks go out to each one of them. They include members of the Faculty Senate, ASG, and so many different areas on campus. In addition to the fall planning group, there are a number of subsidiary groups that have been doing planning around specific areas and issues. And I'll take just a moment to highlight 3 or 4 of those. For example, there's an academic planning group, and they've been looking at a number of classroom protocol type issues. How do we hold classes in classrooms that might be a little different than what is typically thought of? So, for example, in art or in music or in a lab, how do we hold classes? How do we keep our faculty and our students safe in those classes? And of course, they're looking at regular classrooms as well, and what the processes should be with respect to those classrooms. Over in athletics, Kent Weiser has a group that's been meeting to talk about how student athletes return to campus, how they work out, how they practice. And so there's a lot that is going on in many different groups beyond just the fall planning group that are involved in this important discussion about how we all return to campus. I also want to say thank you to each of you because many of you have asked questions of fall planning group members or of individuals who are involved with these other committees. And those questions help drive our thinking and help prompt us to make sure we're exploring all of our options and making the best decisions possible for a return to campus that is as safe as possible for our students, for our staff, and for our faculty. Last week, you received a message that outlines our return to campus stages. And if you read through that message, you probably picked up on one thing, which is that this will be a gradual process. Our goal is for most of us to return to campus by August 3rd in order to prepare for the fall semester. If you recall, early on when COVID first started and we started to see cases of it around Kansas, we made a promise to all of you that you would not be asked to return to campus with less than 1 week's notice. And so I wanted to reiterate that. You will have at least 1 week's notice before you are asked to return to campus for your work. One other important point that I wanted to make is that please, if you want to go back earlier, visit with your supervisor about that. We'll go through the stages here in just a minute, and some of you will be going back over the next few weeks, but please visit with your supervisor if you want to go back any earlier than is scheduled for you, because an earlier return has broader implications with respect to cleaning and sanitation of different areas of campus. And so please don't return unless you have discussed that with your supervisor and cleared that. Well, let me just briefly take a moment to review those stages. I'm going to take a minute to have a drink of coffee before I do that. So there are 4 stages that Emporia State has identified as part of our return to campus. And we are in stage 1 at this time. And stage 1 occurs through the end of this week. And it really is a stage that has been devoted to planning and to communication. We've had essential personnel on campus. And so you've seen, perhaps if you've driven by, our campus police officers patrolling. You might have seen our facilities employees taking care of our grounds, which look beautiful. But we've only had essential personnel here physically on campus during this first stage. Next week, through June 26th, will be stage 2. And as I go through these dates, please keep in mind that these are what we anticipate the dates will be today, but a resurgence of the virus could cause those dates to change some. But stage 2 will be next week through June 26th. And it really is a stage that is dedicated to bringing a few more back onto campus and preparing for the face-to-face summer 2 session courses. We have a handful of courses that will begin at the end of June, and we want to make sure that those who are working to prepare for the students and for those classroom spaces have the opportunity to return to campus as needed in order to prepare for those late summer face-to-face courses. Of course, you're probably aware that during the summer, most of our courses are online, and that will continue to be the case. But we do have several courses, as I mentioned, that will be face-to-face starting at the end of June. Stage 3 will run from the end of June until the end of July. Again, tentatively based on how things are looking with respect to the level of the virus in this community. And during that time, we'll have limited and gradual return to campus. Departments will continue their preparation for the arrival of our students. And so more and more of you will be back onto campus during that time. And we'll continue, of course, to support those face-to-face classes that are occurring during this time. Throughout all of this, I want to say thank you to those who are engaged in student services, because our student services have been very active in supporting our students online, and gradually we anticipate that student services will provide for face-to-face services as well. But as I said, that will all be fairly gradual. Your supervisors have received a communication that asks each of them to submit a plan for return to campus by the department. And hopefully they've been working with all of you on that. And each department will have a plan that takes into account the safety of each one of you for our faculty and staff as you begin to return to campus. The 4th stage is that final stage where we are completing our preparation for the fall semester, that tentatively is scheduled to begin on August 3rd. And almost all employees will be back on campus by August the 3rd. And so those are our phases. And again, we are primarily concerned about making sure our return to campus is gradual and it's as safe as it can be. And I'll go into some of that here in just a moment. When we return back to campus, it won't be quite like it was in March when we all left. There will be some differences. And I want to spend just a few minutes talking about some of those differences. And those relate primarily to the safety measures that we have to take to assure a prudent return to campus and to assure as much as possible that we can complete our fall semester face-to-face. So one of the primary things you will hear about over the next few days will be a policy with respect to the wearing of masks. We will be requiring masks in common areas. We will be requiring masks when it is impossible to distance oneself appropriately. And I want to talk for just a few minutes about that, but assure you that you'll be getting communication about masks. That will contain a lot more additional information, and there are additional resources that will be made available as well. But face masks are something we wear for each other. I think about those examples, and we've all seen them, we've all heard about them, of people who were unaware that they were carrying the COVID virus. And in all innocence, were able to transmit that on to others. And I think about an example my brother shared with me. He preaches at a church down in the Dallas area, and they began meeting again face-to-face recently. And in that first service where they were back together, a woman who was in attendance found out the next day that she had tested positive for COVID. She didn't know at the time, and that is part of the insidious nature of this virus. People do not know when they are infected and when they are infectious to others. And so we wear masks to keep others safe. Here on campus, we have individuals who have health conditions. Of course, this virus can be dangerous to anyone, but especially to those who may have a health condition. And many of us may also live with family members with health conditions. And so this is something that we're doing to support one another as we live in community. Toward the end of this month, all of you should be receiving, faculty and staff should be receiving, a return to campus packet with some print information about the process of returning to campus. And we've ordered for all of our employees a couple of masks, and so you'll have those as well. My guess is by this time, probably virtually all of you have and regularly are wearing masks if you're interacting with others. And so if you're on campus before those branded ESU masks are sent to you, please do wear those masks. Our employees, our students, our vendors, our guests onto campus will be expected to wear masks when they're in buildings and when they are engaging with one another closer than that 6 feet of social distancing. There are a few exceptions to that, and I want you to be aware of that, but more will be shared in the print materials that you receive in the next few days. For example, it's clearly impossible to wear a mask when you're eating or drinking. When you're playing certain types of musical instruments, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing it would be impossible to play a trumpet or a tuba while wearing a mask. It seems that that would be the case. And there may be some individuals with a health condition for whom wearing a mask is just not possible. But beyond wearing of masks, I want you to know that there are a lot of additional safety measures that are being put in place to assure that as all of us return to campus, we can do so in a safe manner. One of the things that will be important as a practice for each one of us going forward will be a daily self-assessment. Before I engage with others, I'll do a self-assessment and I'll make sure that I am not aware of any COVID symptoms that I may have at the time, a cough or a fever or some of the other symptoms of COVID that have been identified. And you'll receive information about that as well. Further, as we begin to return to campus, as you can imagine, there will be extraordinary efforts taken to assure that surfaces are disinfected regularly. And I want to give a shout out at this point to our custodial staff who have done a phenomenal job early on in assuring that we have safe places to be on campus. As I noted, a number of individuals have continued to work on campus, and our custodial staff has been supporting those individuals. But one thing that you may hear about in the next few weeks is that there will be some changes with respect to how much our custodial staff is able to accomplish and what the rest of us may do. And so, for example, I will likely be disinfecting my own work surface or the doorknobs in my office area. Those of you who are faculty may work with students to disinfect surfaces as each class ends, and you'll be provided with the materials to do that. And though we will be resuming our face-to-face instruction and intend to, as much as possible, complete our semester face-to-face, I also want you to know there'll be some differences with respect to the kinds of meetings and the ways that we might be able to gather together over the fall. One topic in which there is a huge amount of interest has to do with large events on campus. Guidelines for large events will be distributed later this week, we think. If not later this week, then early next week. Like so many other important topics, there's been a group that's been comprised of individuals who are in the event planning business for the university. And specifically, there have been individuals from athletics, from our foundation, from admissions, who have been very involved in looking at whether we are able to host events on campus. If so, what would be appropriate protocols for those events? What size can those events be? And again, the goal is to keep all of us on campus as safe as possible, and also to assure the safety of anyone who may be visiting campus. As we look at those events, there will be some changes. Our events may have to be smaller than they've been in the past in order to assure appropriate social distancing. And I'll give one example that I believe would be a good example of the ways that our work will change some. As admissions begins to host Black and Gold events to welcome prospective students to our campus, those will be much smaller. Campus tours will be smaller. And all of that will be done to assure that we can preserve the safety of our faculty, our staff, and our students, but also of visitors. When we have smaller Black and Gold events, it also means we'll have more of them, as you might well guess, to assure that we can continue to have a robust recruitment function here at Emporia State. Well, I mentioned a little bit about academics as well, and some of the things that are happening there. A couple of other topics that are being reviewed by committees with an academic focus include the academic calendar and whether it will be exactly the same or whether it might change some. We're certainly seeing some examples of other universities saying they'll make some changes to the academic calendar during this next year. And we've been looking at different options as well and hope in the next week or so to have all of that finalized. There's also been a group that is specifically looking at the classroom protocols that I mentioned earlier. Well, in addition to all of this that is happening due to COVID-19, I know that you all are aware that Emporia State, like other institutions, is facing some budget challenges. I shared that with you back in early January and asked all of you to please be mindful, if you're a faculty or staff member, be mindful about how you're spending money during this rest of the fiscal year. And I want to say thank you, because you have certainly done that. We also shared that we had a need to identify $2.2 million worth of budget savings. And Emporia State has been so lucky in so many ways, but one of the ways is that our shared governance groups have great leadership, and the shared governance groups have been engaged in meetings to talk about the approach to identifying those budget cuts and also to review the proposed budget cuts. And so I want to say thank you to the leaders of our shared governance groups, including our students. It has been very helpful to have your input as we've talked about those important budget issues. You know, Emporia State is certainly not alone in facing budget challenges. And if you've spent much time reading academic publications, I know that you're probably aware that budget challenges are ubiquitous in higher education, even among name brand institutions. I think about Stanford University, which is cutting $267 million from its budget right now, or Brown University or UT Austin, which are in the process of budget cuts as well. Closer to home, you may have seen in the last couple of weeks that KU announced that they would be cutting $120 million, which is 26% of their revenue, from their budget. K-State has already furloughed 350 employees. And it's hitting close to home. One of our athletic conference peer institutions announced a few months ago that they would cut 30% of their faculty. And those kinds of cuts are extraordinarily painful. So there is a sense in which, although cutting $2.2 million is painful for us, I want to say I'm grateful that it's not more. I need to let you know, though, that depending on fall enrollments, depending on what happens at the state level with respect to state funding of higher education, we don't know whether the $2.2 million we've identified will be enough. And as we go through the process of cutting budgets, it's really never a question of cutting something that's not good. It's always the difficult choice of cutting something that is good. And in higher education, 2/3 of our budget is people. And so it always means that there are individuals who may lose their job when it comes to budget cut. So let me share just a little bit about how we got to the $2.2 million and what it means in terms of people. Let me just say that as budget cuts were considered, we kept a number of important considerations at the forefront. Our strategic plan, maintaining the quality of our programs, prioritizing needs and services to our students. At the end of the day, we had to cut just over 20 positions. And those 20 positions came in sort of two different groups. One, the largest group, are open positions that will not be filled. And that amounted to 16 positions. The other is a handful of positions where someone who holds a job today learned that their job would not continue, either this next year or for the fiscal year 22. So the remaining positions, that handful of positions, are being taken, some this year, some next year. And all of the individuals for whom those difficult conversations had to occur, they are aware of it at this point. And I certainly feel strongly that in every instance, it's been a difficult decision because we have great people here at Emporia State. And it is painful to have to make those budget cuts, and we will do everything that we can to support those individuals as they make that transition. We're also, as an institution, in a bit of a, I don't want to say hiring freeze exactly, maybe frost is the right term. We know some of you are in departments that have openings. And while openings might not be filled right now, I use the term frost, hiring frost, because if it is a crucial opening, then you need to be visiting with your vice president so that a decision can be made about filling that opening. And certainly we have some openings that are absolutely crucial that will continue to be filled as those occur. You know, one of the other areas that involves pain when it comes to budget cutting are cuts that impact our students somewhat directly. And among the budget decisions that had to be made were some cuts to student wages and to graduate assistantships and tuition waivers for some graduate students. We tried as much as possible to preserve those because obviously that's important for so many of our students. And so I wanted you to be aware of that aspect as well. It's painful to have to make some of these budget cuts. There were also some operating fund cuts that have been made, and I want to thank all of you who helped with that. Those operating fund cuts came in many forms. Some came in the form of renegotiating contracts or maybe making decisions to significantly limit travel in the future. And those are helpful as well as we go through this process of implementing this $2.2 million worth of budget cuts. So you may be sitting there and thinking, wow, this is painful, and it is. What can I do to help Emporia State as we move forward? And there are a number of things that each of you can do, and I know you do them. And you can help us by reaching out to our current students. If you know of students, maybe they worked with you in your department, make sure they're coming back and completing their education here at Emporia State. If you have a role to play in helping our admissions department or graduate area with recruiting students, please continue to do that as well. And to so many of you who are involved in student retention, thank you. Please continue your efforts there. And as you think about your spending in your department over this next year or two, please continue to spend in a very mindful way, thinking about whether an expenditure really has to happen as we move forward. You know, Emporia State has had tremendous momentum in the last couple of years. And as I think about the things that have been happening, I think about the great work that has been done in admissions. The work that's been done in admissions has resulted in increases in our incoming freshman students for the last couple of years. I think about the great work done in the graduate area. We have the highest number of graduate students in ESU history. And I think about the work that has been done by so many of you on the faculty side, on the staff side, to support our students and help retain our students. We have had 2 years in a row of all-time record high student retention at Emporia State. And so thank you for that work. And I think about the work that's being done by those who are in our advancement area to raise money on behalf of the university. And last year, we raised more money than the institution ever had in a single year. So thank you as well for that work. There's so much to be proud of. We've made great strides on so many areas, and We're working hard on the strategic plan. And I know that it's difficult to continue to do work when we also have to go through the process of cutting budgets and maybe saying goodbye to some treasured colleagues. But I want to say thank you, because there is a lot of momentum here. And as much as we find it painful to cut, there are certainly others who are going through far more extraordinary cuts than we are dealing with right now. So I want to say thank you to all of you, and let you know how much I appreciate your flexibility, the ways that you have continued to support our students during this last few months as we finished our spring semester in an unprecedented fashion. And I know that you all are working hard as you make plans for the fall semester. So thank you for that as well. I believe we have a bit of time now for some questions. And I want you all to know that I have a couple of phone a friends in the form of Ray Lauber and Diana Kuhlmann, who, if questions are beyond my ability to answer well and completely, I will defer to. Again, if you want to submit questions, if you go to emporia.edu live on this event, you'll see a mechanism for submitting questions at this time. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I believe we're turning over now to Gwen Larson to provide questions.
Thank you very much, President. And yes, folks have found the submit questions button. We've gotten some new questions while you've been talking to us. I'm going to start with some questions about reopening campus and coming back for the fall 2020 semester. A very popular question because we've had variations of it in every single virtual presentation. What is the status of reopening the Center for Early Childhood Education? And do you know what safety procedures will be in place?
I don't know all of the safety procedures at this point. It is our intention to reopen. And the most recent update I had is that the CECE staff are working with two very important groups to assure that as they reopen, which hopefully will be in the not too distant future, it can be done so safely. Those two important groups are custodial services, because obviously we want to make sure that for our smallest members of the Hornet Nation, we're able to keep them safe. And so there will be additional procedures, though I don't know the full extent. And I know that CECE staff are consulting with custodial services right now to assure that they have the best possible practices in place to assure safety. The other important area that they are consulting with is with Mary in our health center. She has done a phenomenal job of advising so many areas on campus, and CECE staff have been in touch with her as well to assure that they have enough knowledge about COVID and how to protect each other and how to protect any students who may be in the CECE. And so those consultations are occurring right now. I'm not sure exactly when we will be reopening, but we certainly do plan to reopen. And my hope would be that will be in the not too distant future, because I know as we begin these next few phases, particularly for those of you with younger kids who may rely on CEC, that will be really important to you in getting back to work on campus. Thank you for that question.
Our next question actually came from two different people, one a staff member and one a parent in the community that I'm guessing is sending us a new student in the fall. And that is what COVID-related policies will be implemented in the residence halls. What do we know about campus student housing for the fall?
That is a great question. And hopefully it was answered a little bit by my comments about the wearing of masks and some of the work that is being done to assure that we are cleaning, sanitizing, and cleaning again in our various spaces on campus. Beyond that, though, I want you to be aware that there is a group that is specifically working on housing and dining protocols and policies, and they will be bringing their draft policies forward to the fall planning group later this week. And so we will have an opportunity then to ask questions. And like many of you, I am also a parent of a college student and share similar concerns. And so I'll be putting that hat on for a bit when we review that policy. And then as well, there'll be policies with respect to dining. I would anticipate that there will be a lot of decisions that center around, for example, in dining, how do we assure that social distancing is preserved? I think the salad bar, which I love, will probably be a thing of the past for the next few months because that would be really hard to assure that it remains completely sanitized, that all of the implements remain completely sanitized. But as I said, we don't have complete policies developed yet. That group is working hard, and later this week we'll be sharing their recommendations with the fall planning group, which in addition to me includes a number of other members who also either have now or have had students who are college students.
When you talked about face masks, you talked about we would be wearing them for other people, especially people who may be at higher risk from COVID-19 or take care of people who are. So that led to a question, how customizable will the return be for faculty and staff, specifically someone who is at higher risk or who is a caretaker for someone at high risk who wants to continue working remotely?
That is a great question, and I think it's one that Ray Lauber might be uniquely equipped to answer, but certainly we are in the process of developing our understanding of not only what we're legally required to do, but also what is right for us to do, because this is a situation where caring for our people likely goes beyond the letter of the law. And I will turn it over to Ray for just a moment and let him weigh in on this as well.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak in here. So I think that the answer has a number of different layers. I think that probably the most important layer here is that we are developing some guidance that will be coming out here hopefully very shortly with information about how we'll navigate through a number of those steps, how we'll work with faculty and staff who are returning back. And then the other element to that is also in terms of how it is that we're going to work with individuals who cohabitate with individuals who may be at particular risk. So all of those are items that will have additional information coming out in the future. We also are encouraging our supervisors, particularly since we have learned that we are able to do things differently than maybe we thought about how it was that they would be able to be done before. But we're encouraging supervisors to also be looking at some of those business functions to determine what flexibility they might be able to have from a business standpoint. So I think hopefully that hits all of the points of the question there.
Thank you, Ray. Our next question is talking about the relationship between Emporia state decisions and what is happening in the larger community. So as the state and eventually Lyon County further open up throughout the fall, how are those changing policies going to impact Emporia state guidelines?
Well, that is a great question. And one thing that I can share with you that is absolutely true is that certainly at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, where guidance is issued, we will be compliant with that guidance. As an institution, though, we also have opportunities to go beyond that guidance where we think it makes sense for our community. And so there may be examples where we will go a bit beyond that guidance. And so I'll share with you, for example, what I mentioned earlier with respect to face masks. If you are out and about around Emporia, while at the federal, at the state, at the local level, the wearing of face masks has been urged, you will see that not everyone does that, even when they are around one another. Yet on this campus, when people are in common areas, our expectation is that they will protect one another by wearing face masks. So that's an example where we may be a bit more conservative in order to protect one another and our family members and our friends and our colleagues.
Thank you. I've got one more reopening question, and then we'll turn to the budget questions we have. Our last reopening question is, approximately when should we know what the fan experience will be during athletic events, what that will look like, specifically football season?
Hey, that is a great question, and I wish I knew all of the answers. You are probably aware that at the NCAA and at our conference level, there have been some recommendations made to slightly reduce the seasons and to also somewhat reduce the amount of travel that our athletic teams will be engaging in this fall. And the answer is we don't fully know what the fan experience will be this fall. I would certainly hope that we can have games with fans in the stands, but what that will look like exactly, we don't know at this point in time. We're certainly working on a variety of policies, and athletics is an area where there will be the development of a good many policies over the next several weeks. For example, just yesterday, the fall planning group was looking at an excellent plan from Kent Weiser that relates to how do we bring back those first student athletes? What does that process look like? How do we assure that they are safe while they are back on campus? And so we're trying to take those policy making obligations in order. And so those policies that relate to bringing our student athletes back will be the ones that our athletics department is reviewing and recommending first. And then as we move closer to the fall season, hopefully we'll be able to share with our fans more about what the fan experience will look like for this fall.
Thank you. So moving to some budget questions. The first one is asking, are these cuts temporary, permanent, or a mix of both? And if both, will it be clear which are temporary and which are permanent?
So these cuts are permanent cuts. So hopefully that is something that was well understood. I believe it was well understood by the different departments that provided information about where they would find it possible to make cuts. And there were cuts in virtually every department on campus. So these $2.2 million worth of cuts are permanent cuts.
Okay. A little more specific question to the reference of positions that are unfilled that will not be hired. Is a position that was filled by a full-time visiting or adjunct faculty member in 2019-20 considered an open line for purposes of cuts?
That is a good question, and I am going to use my phone a friend option and ask Diana Kuhlmann to weigh in on that. I believe that, and we certainly know that our departments are reliant on adjuncts and reliant on visiting professors. If a position was not one that was submitted, for cuts, then that will continue on. But I will ask Diana to weigh in on that as well.
Thank you, President. Good morning, everyone. So I can be accused of getting a little in the weeds and complicated on this sometimes, but it will depend. President kind of referred to it already in what a department chose to put forward as a cut. So if that adjunct or temporary faculty person was hired from funds that were attached to a permanent position that the department chose to put forward for the budget cuts, then that temporary or adjunct may not be hired, or the department may use other sources to hire that person. If that person was paid off of temporary funds, which most of the academic departments have an allocation specifically for hiring temporary or adjuncts, and the department did not forego any of those, then that person may be hired back next year. And that will all be left up to the department and how to meet their needs.
Okay, thank you. Related to that, a student has understandably asked, what will happen with GA positions during the fall? There was some reference to some possible cuts there.
Yes, so there are cuts to some GA positions, though we've been, I think, careful to cut as few of them as possible. And I should mention that the way GA positions work, they are sort of two types. For some GA positions, a position much like a student employee position where there are wages assigned. And then for other GA positions, it might be a tuition waiver. And so there are some cuts in both areas. We've kept as many of those positions as we could, and certainly where commitments had already been made, we have honored those commitments. But there have been some cuts in both of those areas. I'll give you a quick example from my office. We have had a GA position, and that GA has typically done work not only for Diana Kuhlmann and her team, but some work more broadly in the office. And that's one of the positions that's going away. In some instances, some student wage cuts have occurred. And so in my office, for example, we've cut student wages some. It doesn't necessarily mean we will have fewer student workers, but I happen to know that I think all of the student employees in my office hold multiple jobs. And so it may mean that they're working fewer hours in the president's office. And so there's been a variety of approaches, but certainly that is one of the most painful areas, is the area of GA positions and student wage cuts for sure.
Thank you. So Diana mentioned working with departments to determine where cuts might be made. So a question is, have any programs with low enrollment been looked at being cut?
Yes, there have been low enrollment programs that have been reviewed. And let me just refer back to the last several years. Emporia State, as an institution, has done a good job. And I hesitate to use the word good because it doesn't quite capture it, because it's always painful to cut programs, even those that are low enrollment. But we have cut a number of programs, and I believe it is 9 programs over the last 6 years. And there is a cut to a program that is contemplated in the savings that we have discussed. That has to be taught out. So that is something that we've certainly looked at as well.
The last budget question that I have is asking about receiving more information, or more information that is easier to refer back to rather than just this forum. Do you have plans to communicate to campus about the budget information?
That is a great question / suggestion, and we will certainly try to do that in a way that will make it easier for people as they're thinking about the budget cuts and the impact. And so we will work on sending something out, or at least a link to something that has more of that information kind of boiled down into a succinct presentation for individuals who are interested in referring back. Also remind everyone that whether you're a student, a faculty member, or staff member, your shared governance groups were involved in not only identifying what the process would look like, but also reviewing the recommended cuts. And so they would have a higher level of knowledge than can be shared easily in a time like this. And so that's another resource as well. But I'll take that as a good suggestion, and we'll work on getting something out or posted somewhere for people who want to refer back to it. Thank you.
Okay. I am checking very quickly because we just had another question come in. I want to see if it's related to the budget.
Okay.
It is. You may need to phone a friend on this one. I'm not sure. But the question is, with regard to budget cuts, what was the ratio of cuts to instruction personnel versus administrative personnel? Do we know that?
I don't know that off of the top of my head. And we could certainly look at that. I mentioned at the beginning that in higher education, about 2/3 of our budget is in personnel. When you look at the personnel in higher ed, there tend to be more dollars on the academic side than on the staff side. I know there were cuts to positions both on the staff side and on the academic side, but I don't recall what the specific ratio of those dollar cuts was, or the personnel cuts was. The ratio looks quite different depending on whether you're looking at noses or looking at dollars, as you can well imagine.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump back. We have a really good fall planning and return to campus question that a student has submitted, and we are almost out of time, so this might be your last one.
Okay.
This student wants to know, what happens if we get a positive COVID case on campus?
Well, we are working through all of our protocols with respect to that. And one of the things that I can tell you is that we've been working very closely, not only with our health center on campus, but also with the Lyon County Health Department. And we do have ways to provide for isolation if someone is not already living in circumstances that easily allow for that. And we are also working with the Lyon County Health Department to assure that we can do appropriate contact tracing, because that will be something that will be very important. So if a particular individual is identified as being COVID positive, it would be important to know with whom that individual has spent any significant amount of time. And again, the hope would be that people will be very serious about wearing of masks this fall. And I want to take just a moment to say thank you to Braden Sofer and Amaya Oshel, the ASG president and vice president, because I know that they are working hard to communicate out to different student groups. And that their hope would be that our students also will be very serious about the wearing of masks and taking other precautions. One document that I saw, and I'll share this just because I found it a little bit humorous, but one document that I saw last week where we were talking about how each of us can keep himself or herself safe, there was the phrase robust personal hygiene that was used. And I still am tickled by that, but certainly the kinds of things that we've all seen are very important in helping to assure that we don't have broader spread if we do identify a case or two on campus.
All right. And our hour is almost up, so I will let you close us.
Okay. Well, again, I want to say thank you to each of you for joining in today. These are difficult discussions on very complicated and in some ways emotionally draining topics. And I have grown to appreciate all of you here at Emporia State so much more because you've done such a phenomenal job. Sorry, I'm going to have to take a drink. Of supporting Emporia State and supporting our students. And I want to thank you for spending some of your time today to go over these important issues with us. We are deeply appreciative of the work that each and every one of you does. And to our students, we're so grateful that you've selected Emporia State, and we are doing all that we can to assure that you have a great fall semester. Thank you all so much.